Hi, I'm Delicacia Price, and I thank you so much for offering me this opportunity to share with you a few words as you commemorate the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., specifically as we delve into his sentiments on being anti war, anti poverty, and anti racism. I applaud the courage to continue the dialogue and use the platform you have to encourage continued conversation on matters germane to us all. I am so pleased to see CNU face tough topics and encourage discussion and not shy away from it. So thank you. But as we go about these discussions, there are a few guardrails that I would like to encourage as we move along through the dialogue. One is the importance of reading the whole work. It is so easy to go to Brainy Quote and grab some words that MLK said, but before we can quote them, we should invest the time to read the work from which we are pulling the quote in order to understand the full and complete thought. And also, when we quote, we should use all of the words in that complete thought. For those of you that love literature, for instance, if I wanted to tell you about A Tale of Two Cities, and I chose to say it was the best of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the epoch of belief, it was the season of light, it was the spring of hope, I would not be using that work in an honest way. I left out the whole other half, right? Well, leaving out major portions of context and in a quote can completely change the intent and meaning that the author had. Another guardrail that I offer is that it's so important to see Martin Luther King as human. One of the most powerful things in seeing the humanity of the freedom fighters is being able to see ourselves in them. Seeing their humanity is key because when we make them into heroes and deities with unattainable standards, when we romanticize their work and oversimplify their journey, we miss that they were ordinary people just doing the work to be free. They saw injustice and said, let's fix it. We each have a different story and a different testimony and different talents that we bring to the table. Those freedom fighters of the past have their place in history. They followed their call, they did the work. We can be inspired by them as we go about our own walk. So yeah, we can't glorify them so much that we end up taking ourselves off the hook from doing our own work every day. So yes, Martin Luther King Jr. was an amazing speaker, and you might not be able to speak as well, but there's something that you bring to the table that you were blessed with that we need you to do the work in that lane. So don't take yourself off the hook. We absolutely can make a difference in our own ways. We can take what they learned and build upon it, adding our own flair, our own zhuzh, and our own lessons from lived experiences. They were born for that time, but you were born for such a time as this. How will you work to make a difference? How will you use your talent to make our society better? Further, another guardrail, as a seminary student myself, I think it is super important to know the role of King's seminary teachings on his thoughts and beliefs in the movement. King did extensive work on concepts like Josiah Royce's idea of beloved community and in how we should relate to each other as neighbors, coexisting in the same space and in the same context. King's work and speeches also gave us the opportunity to investigate his theology on Imago Dei and how he sees human beings as having been made in the image of God, specifically in being made to be in community with each other and be relational to each other. It is really important to remember he was a minister and not forget that reverend. He was born and raised in the Baptist church, but he also had significant growth and maturation in his life and in his theological principles, and his thoughts evolved over time. But one thing that didn't change is that King really did believe that beloved community was attainable and that just if we all did our own part, we could achieve it. He understood our role as neighbors to be that of complementing each other in reciprocal and equitable ways in this sort of teamwork. And those are quite bold and courageous thoughts to have during the 1960s and before, when everything was so separate. Now, we also have to remember that the life and time of Martin Luther King was not that long ago. Sometimes the black and white photos and videos might imply that was way back, but we are talking about only 58 years ago is when the 1964 Civil Rights Act was signed. And I also caution us from talking about the civil rights movement as having been completed without discussing the fact that the fights that King and so many others fought then, we are unfortunately still fighting today. And that's why his words remain so relevant within the proper context of the quote. And my last caution is to understand what King called the fierce urgency of now, and when he was talking about why we can't wait. In his work, King described the situation quite poignantly as only he could. He writes, "For hundreds of years, the quiet sobbing of an oppressed people had been unheard by millions of white Americans. The bitterness of the Negroes' lives, remote and unfelt except by a sensitive few. Suddenly, last summer, the silence was broken. The lament became a shout and then a roar. And for months, no American, white or Negro, was insulated or unaware. The stride toward freedom lengthened and accelerated into a gallop while the whole nation looked on. White America was forced to face the ugly facts of life as the Negro thrust himself into the consciousness of the country and dramatized his grievances on 1,000 brightly lighted stages." I mean, talk about a way with words. And if we reread that passage, thinking about the relevancy today, one might be able to draw parallels to the United States during the summer of 2020, when the renewed racial uprising happened after the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. In both situations and both periods, it is evident we cannot wait for peace. We must create it. We cannot wait for peace. We must create it. But what is this peace that King discussed? And what does it look like for us today, here and now? So in defining something, sometimes it's easier to talk about what it's not, to talk about the misconceptions. For King, peace was not simply the absence of war or the absence of confrontation. It's not this sense of false unity and quieting one side for the sake of the other. And it's not random civility or politeness in the face of injustice. Peace does not equate passivity. In his work, Stride Toward Freedom, written by King in 1958, he described Montgomery prior to the bus boycott as this. But this discontent was still latent in 1954. At that time, both Negroes and whites accepted the well-established patterns of segregation as a matter of fact. Hardly anyone challenged the system. Montgomery was an easygoing town. It could have been described as a peaceful town. But the peace was achieved at the cost of human servitude. He recounts that one of the white residents confronted him and said, "Over the years, we have had such peaceful and harmonious race relations here. Why have you and your associates come in to destroy this long tradition?" Not missing a beat, King answered, "You have never had real peace in Montgomery. You have had a sort of negative peace in which the Negro too often accepted his state of subordination. But this is not true peace. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice." Y'all, true peace is the presence of justice. Now, we know how the rest of the story played out with the historic Montgomery bus boycott as the freedom fighters sought both justice and peace. The tension we saw in Montgomery was necessary, according to King, as the oppressed and their allies rose up to start that trek toward positive peace and creating a permanent peace, not the negative peace of quiet passivity. Further, I would add that peace is not gaslighting or hypocrisy. And let me explain. If you've ever worked with kids, let me know if you've seen this, where a kid hits another kid and the hit kid hits back. But then the original kid runs to the closest adult in charge to cry foul that they were hit. My friends, we are not children. We are adults. And you can't take a swing at someone and then when they protect themselves, call them violent. It's hard to take seriously any entity or agency saying they want to work for peace while using violence to solve its problems or promote its agenda. And again, I urge us to have this full conversation to discuss the revolts of the enslaved as violent, but not talk about the violence of the transatlantic slave trade. That is incomplete. To talk about the violence of the riots and not talk about the violence of the oppressive system that led one to riot is incomplete. So again, what does peace look like? It looks like the presence of justice. And I offer that peace is therefore hard work, but it is also a state of being, not a destination. It takes ongoing maintenance, and that requires of us, those who say we seek it, to make a commitment to act in the face of threats against peace. It's a condition where each entity in an equation gets to be whole in their relationship. Peace is equality, equity, justice, and freedom, and true peace is universal. None of us really has it unless we all experience it. I would also offer here that the pursuit for justice and equality are what led Dr. King to fight for voting rights. He and those in the movement knew that there was no accomplishment more important than obtaining and protecting voting rights for all, because that was the foundation for all other fights. For American society, peace must include a strong democracy where all have a voice in creating the change they seek. And for King, attacking those rights is violence. The way we achieve this true peace of which King spoke has the same beginning point as most change. It begins from within. We must investigate first ourselves and the ways that we navigate the world. We can start by answering a few questions. 1, in what ways do we participate in actions that prevent peace from being achieved by others? 2, in what ways are we helping equip the next generation to seek peace in case we don't obtain it in our lifetime? Are there any spaces where our silence might send the message that we're okay with the violence that is occurring because our silence will not protect us? How might we be more active in pursuing peace for ourselves, our families, and our community? Are our expectations for a peaceful society more congruent with random passivity or true peace? Do we encourage others to speak up or be quiet as we think about peace? And what role do our systems play in teaching passivity versus peace, especially in our educational institutions? Y'all, once we understand what we are willing to do to seek it, we can take bold and courageous actions like in the generations before toward peace and justice. And in building the world we all deserve, we can choose to center the voices of the most marginalized of our communities. Listening to the stories of those that live at the intersections of all the isms and those that live at the receiving end of state violence, we can use that as a starting point where we can then begin the hard work of obtaining and maintaining peace for ourselves and our communities through the work of justice. So right here, right now, wherever you are watching this today, let's recommit ourselves to the anti-war cause of creating peace. Let us commit to telling the truth of our history, even when it's uncomfortable, so we won't repeat the past. Let us recommit to speaking up for the most marginalized, being inclusive for all of our neighbors, no matter the color of their skin, where in the city they live, who they love, or how much money they make. Let's see each other all as equals. Let us recommit to clearing our hearts and minds and laws of racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, and xenophobia. Let us recommit to work with all that we have every day to deconstruct systems built on inequality and build systems that heal our communities. Let us refuse to seek refuge in privilege and silence. Let us choose to stay in this work until peace is our reality. So I know, peace is hard work, especially now. But I have hope in each of you that we can create and maintain the peace we all deserve, the peace in the dreams of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you.